Recording. All right. For those of you who might not know, this is the Utopia is a Scam podcast, and I'm joined again by Alison McDowell of wrenchingthegears.com. Alison, thank you so much for being here.
Oh, yeah, you're welcome. I'm glad to have an ongoing conversation.
Yeah, we got to keep maintaining the narrative, right? That's like the key to this whole thing, or not even maintaining, but
If you say it 20 times, it might sink in.
I mean, honestly, that's part of it because the information is so vast, but the core message is all the same. So in any different way that we can connect to that core central thesis, which is, as we know, transhumanism, spatial web, virtualized false reality, and the overtaking of carbon-based life forms. But
Just that. I agree. When
so
you come right down to it, I'm like, that's the unifying force. I mean, I just had someone say, like, I can't organize people against blockchain. And I was like, well, ultimately, like, we're organizing the working class. And I'm like, well, okay, like if this is a war on carbon-based life, ultimately, like we all have a stake in it. Wouldn't it be nice to find a unifying thing that is the most people and then fight the billionaires on that? Like principled. I'm not saying throw away your values, but I'm like, why not actually say what the problem is and then organize people against the actual problem? I'm sorry, I'm just so frustrated.
no, I'm with you. It's like there's like this thing in the zeitgeist of like media consumption and social media where everything needs like labels, or it needs to fit into a certain box for people to like sync up with. And this is something that kind of, there's so many nodes to it that the unifying overarching theme is enough, because if it's a war on carbon-based life, then whether you know it or not, you're going to be in the battlefield, on the battlefield, like you're in it. So you could kind of never know that you were, but kind of just acknowledging that you are, that's a force right there. That's a striking initiative to be like, okay, we're in this, we're against this, we're gonna fight. How do we do it? Okay, that's the question, like
Right.
asking the question, being willing to ask the question of how do we do it? What's in our toolbox? What can I offer? What can I bring to the table? What do I need to know? And it seems like not nobody, because I don't like being too negative, but it seems like so many people are just willing to kind of skirt the issues and acknowledge certain parts of it without really seeing the overarching theme.
Well, I think you have to be willing to like get out of the, step away from the table of other people's stuff. Like you actually have to be willing to unlearn some things or like leave some things behind. Not to say that you were wrong about them, but to say like those things are not serving me in the moment. And let's like learn from what that was and let's build on that and let's adapt. And instead it feels like people are continuing to like hold on to a set of analyses that probably was relevant 20 years ago, like 10 years ago, but it's increasingly irrelevant in this moment. And yet they're like, this is what I know. I have to fit it in like into this place. And I'm like, no, you really don't. Like you can like learn that and then say like it's pivoting in this way. Like it's, they can't understand the material relations. They don't like, they can't get past that the material, like our understanding of labor and the material world is being manufactured through military and finance, which they should understand, into something. It's inverted, right? So the same dynamics are being inverted into the virtual, but no one seemed like there's too few people who seem to be able to follow that thread.
Yeah, as like a funny example, is something that like me coming into this space is sort of inspired by living in San Francisco and seeing like the results of tech culture, or tech lack of culture on a city like San Francisco that's booming with all sorts of subcultures and music and art and all these things, and seeing this tech boom take place. And I've only lived here for 5 or 6 years, but knowing it kind of intimately and being engaged to somebody who's a lifelong San Franciscan, seeing and socializing in the San Francisco scene and seeing the result of all these people who don't really belong here, and the result of their environment sort of being projected onto the beautiful life force of San Francisco. Like that's what got me into it, is seeing this like this takeover of our reality in this like bland monotonous like ID badges, scannable ID badges at the bar, hanging out, you know. But
Yeah.
and so like unlearning things, like being like into conspiracy theories and in my late teens and early 20s, seeing this like fourth industrial revolution, great reset information sort of go mainstream in a way. You see like Bill Gates is what people just want to talk about. Bill Gates wants to kill us all. Bill Gates this and that. And it's like, okay, yeah, obviously Bill Gates is like a front man for major players in this, but attaching yourself to like this cult of personality that Bill Gates is the driving force behind this, and I'm even guilty of it. Like my fiance has said to me, like, would you shut the hell up about Bill Gates? Like it's not Bill Gates, you know. And she has her own view on things, but like I was like, you know
Yeah.
what, you're right. Like I need to let go of some of this stuff and let go of some of like the media that I was consuming around people who hyper focus on like individuals as the driving force, because that's not how this works at all. Like you said, this is a militarized system that's, you know, has nodes in finance and technology and all these things. But when we recognize it as a military system, a militarized system, that's broad. That's it's an over, there's a force, you know, like and attaching yourself to.
Yeah, it's an imperial system. I mean, to me, that's also something that like kind of crosses the partisan bridge. Like nobody, like few people, unless you're the dominator, you don't actually like the domination part. Like, you know, the idea of empire or domination, like across left and right, most people are like, I don't really feel like the dominate. I'm not, you know, unless you're into dominate, but like for the most part, as a government rule, like people don't want that. And so to me, like if you that's like the predator energy again. Like there are things out of balance that are seeking domination over the masses of life on the planet, not just humanity, but all of natural life. And so how do we counterbalance that? But then, you know, it's interesting because I've had these run-ins on this relationship software mapping system that I use, and they keep saying like keep adding like the subsets of the signups, like, and you can only use it for this and this, and they get sort of like you're only allowed to map people with disproportionate power. And of course, that's very vague, but essentially what it's trying to say, I think, is like we could map a Bill Gates or a, you know, Paul Tudor Jones or Ray Dalio or the head of a, like Goldman Sachs, and that would be, or like, you know, Boeing or, you know, some of these entities. But the middle manager who's doing the program that shows up at the webinar, that if you actually put that on the map and said like, oh, you know, this person is attached to this webinar that is planning this policy that reveals a lot about the bigger game. Like you're not supposed to map that person because they're not the disproportionate. And I'm like, no, like there are, you know, tens of millions of functionaries, of people who have a nice 5 or 6 figure salary, and they're just going about their job of like what they're told to do. And they're just carrying this thing out, and they don't understand the bigger picture. And they just, you know, for the most part, do a reasonable job at the thing they're told to do, which is running the empire. And so, like, to me, there's this sort of psychic challenge of like, yeah, it is Bill Gates, but it's also like my neighbor down the street that runs the Center for High Impact Philanthropy. Like, do I think this person is a huge well, no, but that program is a problem, that it exists is a problem, that we're creating markets in global trauma management of dispossessed people is a problem, right? So if you're not allowed to include that in your analysis, if that somehow that has to get scuttled away and you're only allowed to talk about things in partisanship or the high level figures, you're going to miss a lot. You're going to miss an awful lot.
Yeah, and like it's not about these people being evil, you know, like that's not a lot of these managerial class, like they're well-meaning people. They're not, they're part of the system, but they're doing their job, right? And that's something that's respectable and understandable. But seeing how things play out now, where we can identify what's being built and we see it actually happening, like even that, like going back to like the media thing, people are talking about the fourth industrial revolution as if it's something that's coming. And especially the past year and even just the last few months, I'm like, no, it's happening. Like this is clearly happening. We're here, we're in this, and we're just going to pretend like we're just going to keep pretending like it's looming on the horizon. Like Bill Gates wants to depopulate us. Like even seeing people on like Twitter and stuff just like, oh, you're wrong, Allison, Bill Gates is going to kill 6 billion people. And it's like, come on, we can't think like that, right? Like that's not an acceptable way of organizing or managing what we know and sharing. You know, like, okay, let's all just be fatalists, right?
Well, I like to actually understand the landscape. I mean, I think, that's my skill, is the landscape. If you're organizing and you think you're organizing, you know, in a rural, farming community, but you're really organizing in a desert, like it's a different tactic. Like the tactics are going to be different. So if we don't actually understand what we're trying to accomplish, and that may be the thing. Like I still am not convinced, as someone who identified more on the left, that like maybe they think transhumanist blockchain socialism is a good thing. Like maybe I need to reevaluate my analysis, like get some clarity, because I don't really know what the left, where they actually are in this. Like it seems like increasingly there's something that I thought they wouldn't be, but maybe they are. And then maybe that's not their problem to change. Maybe it's just my relationship to that.
It's weird
I
because
don't know.
it seems like progressivism on its face should be, or is, pro-human, right? Like it's stands up for individual rights. It recognizes the problems with the system, the oppressive factors that are in play so much. Like that's pretty much the dominant force, and it's kind of dominated by identity politics too these days. But still, there's a core to it that's genuine and has like a concern for the fellow man, right? But why, like, how are we not recognizing that transhumanism is a threat, and it's up to us to to see through it, to like know it and not pretend it's not there, because I think that's the biggest thing. Like seeing the left play out is like they're just pretending it's not there. Like they're focused on real life, real time issues, but when it comes to this stuff, it's just whoosh, right over their heads, or like it just won't engage with it.
But it's the whole structure of what we're dealing with. It's a biosecurity state. So to me, that's kind of if you don't understand that we're in a war of synthetic biology and the life science corporate apparatus, on like they feel entitled to your body. The life sciences people feel entitled to mine and track your bodily functions, period.
Body
Whether or not you consent to it or not.
like body autonomy, like that should be a huge uniting factor across the political spectrum, across all spectrums. Like again, your humanity, your body, your individualism. Like the way I've been trying to frame it to myself and to people around me is like, do you like road trips? Do you like going for walks and like, making decisions in your life and just doing things? Because that's actually what's at stake. Like, for example, like, do you like concerts? You like live music? Yeah, you do. Do you see what's being done? It's being taken from you right in front of your face. And since we last talked, which was like January, I think probably about 3 months ago, vaccine passports were very much, we discussed it, Common Pass, Clear Pass. But now here we are in April, Clear Pass is happening. Like Staples Center just announced that you need to use the Clear Pass or a negative test. The San Francisco Giants are utilizing Clear Pass. And I mean, the most powerful example that actually is getting people a little bit acclimated into the space is what's happening on St. Vincent in the Caribbean with the volcanic eruption,
Oh boy.
and cruise ships only taking vaccinated people to evacuate. And it's not only is it the de facto vaccine passport thing coming into play, it's also sort of a mass vaccination program, forced vaccination program on a, I don't know if it's a third world country, a third world area or not, but we're talking native populations, people of color, as these systems always seem to target first. They're using it as a means to be like, oh well, get your vaccine and then you'll be able to get on the ship, and they're actively doing that. Kind of
Yeah.
scary.
I mean, I don't know what to say. I mean, it's really, today I just reshared a map that I made of Johnson and Johnson, because there was this pause, on, that product. And I pulled it out April 2nd, 2020, right? So early, fairly early in the system. I was already looking into Johnson & Johnson. And I mean, like, I knew that they had been found guilty, criminally guilty of being an active participant in exacerbating the opioid crisis. Like, one of their side companies was patenting a special poppy in Tasmania that had like a really high levels, like addictive quality drugs. So like they were found guilty by the state of Oklahoma and like meant to pay like billions of dollars in fines. And so, I was mapping this out at the time and like mapping their problems with the asbestos in the baby powder that they knew for years, and again, the people that were negatively impacted were predominantly like people of color, and then it was pelvic mesh, and then there was like the Risperdal. Like there are so many that these companies are actually criminal. I mean, I'm not just joking about, like, they literally are criminal. And, in addition to that, then they were involved in a lot of the human capital impact investing, like the ALICE stuff that I talked about, the assets limited income constrained employed. And then the Roberts Woods Johnson Foundation, which is the spinoff of that, is a huge player in all of this too, like the blockchain, the MyPass Austin Passport program. Like Robert Woods Johnson is very active in both humanitarian aid, big firm, and domestic, and things that are connected to the human capital finance. So like today I just pulled it back out and I'm like, here's my map, guys. Like I did this almost a year ago to the day, a couple of weeks off, of saying like, we knew this a year ago. Like we knew all of this a year ago. And, so it's hard to see it unfold because I don't know, like, I watched a really good podcast with Tessalina and I think it's Stephen Newcomb on the doctrine of discovery, or he talks about the doctrine of domination. She has this podcast called Let's Make Language Better. It's really good. I can link to it. But it's this conversation towards the end, Newcomb raised this question. He said, it's like if you were the original people standing on the shore seeing the ships come in, and you didn't have the language to understand how they were talking about you. Like you didn't have those words. You didn't even have that mental construct of what would be planned in the minds of those people out there on a ship. And that there was this certain lead time that would be taken before you could actually attain enough language access and knowledge access to even have a conversation like about issues of rights or, domination or these other things, because it wasn't an equal playing field. And I feel like in this space right now, hardly anybody understands human capital finance. Hardly anybody understands, biocomputing and the internet of bio nano things. Like nobody even has the words to imagine it. So they can't even get there because you can keep talking at them, but it doesn't have anywhere to embed. It's nothing that they even know. So like, how do we, like sandpaper, like how do we roughen it up enough that like on the 20th time it starts to stick, the stain penetrates the wood, and we can actually have the conversation of like, what are the ethics? Because right now we can't even have the conversation about what are the ethics.
Yeah. The it's all so crazy. It's like, how do you phrase it? Because it's like, it's not even blaming people for being or uninformed about it. It's like, you really, as a human being, it's normal that you don't understand this crazy technologically driven push to incorporate humanity into like a silicon-based life form. But it's like, when I get on my biggest benders about this topic, I'm like, all right, it's an interdimensional silicon-based anti-life predatory energy that embodies high technology that is clearly preying on human existence. It's
parasitic.
It's overlaying itself onto human existence, using human free will to materialize this system into our realm that ultimately the end game, the end result is swallowing human life into a digital spatial reality, and then eventually it'll just turn off the human side of it and simulate everything, and that's darkness. That's gone. It's like the lights out, like that's gone. Like human, that's what I'm saying. Like, you like road trips, everything that's cool, like driving fast on the back roads, like That's what I like. I like stuff like that. All the cool books that people read, what people wrote about in the 50s and 60s. Like, you know, it's do we really want to like interface with this force? Do we want to have a conversation about it? Do we want to pretend it's not there? Because every day that I wake up and like go outside and go to work, I'm like, we're not in Kansas anymore. This is not the same place that I grew up in, and I'm only 30 years old. Like, I have deep nostalgic connections to humanistic values of like experience and challenges within our own reality. But now I'm just like, I look around and it's like, this is not the same place anymore.
Well, I keep thinking, I mean, I say often about the unborn, like, because the choices we're making are not simply about us, but if this advances, the people who come after us aren't going to get that choice. Like, we may be the last people to choose.
Yeah. I actually had a dream.
I
Like,
mean, it feels deep, it feels hard.
I had a dream, and last night I had a dream that basically when I interpreted it after I woke up, I was like, I was in the spatial web, and it wasn't a nightmare. It wasn't scary. But it
Mhm.
was almost like I was experiencing it from somebody who knew nothing other than the spatial web from the digital realm. And I was like walking in this environment. It's a lot of like bright colors. It wasn't fit. It was like physical reality because I was walking, but there was some like augmentation overlaid on
Mhm.
top of it. And I was having like a conversation with somebody that I knew and somebody that I was close to, but I knew that I was conversing with them digitally. And then as I was walking, I knew that I was approaching them, and I saw them coming up on the horizon as I was walking towards them. But it wasn't them. It wasn't a person. It was sort of like their avatar or like an image of their likeness. And I like the dream was really quick. It was just like that interaction, and I approached them, and I recognized that like I was meeting with them, but it wasn't them. And I woke up and I was just like, wow, that is, imagine being born into a world where this system that we see playing out, this sensor driven environment where the reality is already augmented, but we still have this like free will and we can move about. But what it's there's an advancement going on, and that's what people I think can't really grasp is spatial web, augmented reality. Like, oh, that could never happen. How are they going to bring that into place? And they're putting up 5G sensors on all the light poles in Oakland right now. Like, that's step
Yeah.
one to early
Yeah.
step, early phase stuff. But once you're living in a like it, for people who don't really grasp like the threat of 5G beyond like health concerns and stuff, because that's already been so stigmatized by the media, it's like, okay, if you live in like permanent Wi-Fi, right, then you have sensors picking up and interacting with each other in that environment, then it's augmented. That's like augmentation, because your all your movements are tracked. And it's so many different factors. Like, people are like, oh, the government's not tracking you, like, oh, blah blah blah. It's like, it doesn't need to be overseen.
Yeah, it's
artificial
just
intel-
happening. It's just
ar-
waveforms.
Artificial intelligence and algorithms driven by artificial intelligence and data collection, they'll develop the systems and serve it up on a platter for the people who have the ability to geofence. And like we talked about, Anduril, the military technology company that's active on the Mexican border, like, this technology that they're using there is literally being built in our cities right now.
Well, it's so today, can I just, like, one of the things, somebody emailed me an article, and it wasn't on my horizon, but it was important. It was an article, and I tweeted it, but about Anthropos Capital, and Anthropos Capital, and it was a SPAC, which I didn't know what that was exactly, but like a special purpose acquisitions company. So I guess that's a new thing, a special purpose acquisitions company. And if you look at the SEC filing, it's incorporated in the Cayman Islands, and it's a blank check company. That's what they called it. The description was a blank check company in the Cayman Islands. And Anthropos Capital was specializing in this special acquisitions company and investments that dealt in human capital as a service. Okay. And so the co-chair, and then the people facilitating the deal were Goldman Sachs or the entities and Credit Suisse. Okay. Human capital as a service, folks. All right. This was March 19th that they incorporated. All right. So just a month ago.
It's time
And
to activate, like.
I know. I mean, and so I looked up the address of the headquarters, which wasn't in Grand Cayman. It's in Stamford, Connecticut, and it's a 6-minute walk from Tudor Investments. So Tudor Investments is Paul Tudor Jones, and he was with the Robin Hood Foundation, and in the Bay Area, they call it Tipping Point, I think is the Robin Hood Foundation West.
Yeah.
And it's all these wraparound service pathway programs. And then the co-chair of this organization, McGrew was the last name. I think it's John McGrew. I have to look it up again. But he's co-chair, or he's one of the leaders in Bridgewater Associates. Ray Dalio is like one of the largest hedge funds in the world, working on ESG impact investing with the UN. Okay. And then he also, before he went to Bridgewater, was with Apex Partners, which is Ronald Cohen, which is social impact finance, social impact bonds. He's on the board of Bridges Fund. And so this is really actually happening in real time. Like they just flipped the switch on the Cayman Islands blank check company to essentially start channeling human capital as a service, where does that start? Are you starting with people in addiction? Are you starting with toddlers? Are you starting with, unhoused people, veterans? Like what human capital are you managing on these pathways? And I'm increasingly worried about like Geo Group and these for-profit prison companies coming up with these continuum of care, like workforce readiness. And I don't know, it's just like, I need to make a big map of this, but so few people people who ostensibly understand political economy, like who are very bossy around their version of it, but can't seem to open up and understand this new permutation. Like, yes, blockchain is being used to securitize this debt. I'm not making it up. You can read the paper from Deloitte. Like, I wish I was making this up. I am not making this up. The most powerful financial interests in the world, the accountants and the lawyers and the hedge funds, they've got it set up. It's scaling now.
Yeah. And I like you've done an incredible job of like laying out, especially where these things are going to activate into, for like housing, private prison, continuation of care, that sort of thing, medical industrial complex. To be honest with you, what you just said about that company sort of activating human capital as a service, I think I'm actually living through a pilot program for that, because my work uses a third party human resources payroll, and it's a company that was called Ultimate Technologies, and they recently merged with a company called Kronos Group, and they became Ultimate Kronos Group, I think, UKG.
Ultimate Kronos, that sounds terrifying.
I mean, there's that mythology technology thing again, right? But I think Kronos is either Connecticut or Massachusetts. But to clock in for work is facial recognition. It was first fingerprints, then they just upgraded to facial recognition, and I had no say in the matter other than quitting my job, which unfortunately I don't have the means to do. But if you look at UKG Ultimate Kronos Group's website, they have a lot of white papers on solutions, data-driven solutions, and what's the word? Like impact, and using employees, or like managing employees through data and finding the best solutions to manage your employees with data collection and data analytics. Wow. It's
Have they put in the smart toilets yet?
Right. Seriously though, like it's that close. Like I don't even think about it anymore, like clocking in, but I remember like for months I was always trying to like obscure my face, or like it's worthless now. It even recognizes me with my mask on. So, and it like sometimes it'll be like, it'll form on your face. You'll see the square and it'll be like, oh, can't recognize face. And then you have to like make eye contact with it. or it makes you make
Does
eye
it have your
contact.
retina? Do you think it has your retina?
I'm sure it does. It kind of plays like it's generic, but based on what I know about the company, it has it all. It's crazy. So
Well, the other thing is, like, I spoke with someone in Michigan. I was talking with a group of people, and one of whom their partner, like they were on their partner's health insurance, and there was the whole wellness program, which was another one of these employee management. Um, and if you think back to the Meet Kathy, the pathways provider, Joe will do better out of prison on his prison reentry if his wife and is stop smoking, that sort of thing. And so this idea is that even like people in your household become enmeshed in these employment management systems because they're like incentivizing certain health outcomes within the overall this program too. It just, again,
so
it's like it doesn't feel like we have consent over this stuff. We
yeah,
don't have consent.
I mean, when you leverage like employment or in like a paycheck or like spousal healthcare, getting your spouse or whoever your family into your health plan or whatever, that it's like the classic libertarian thing is like, oh, you have a choice, you don't need to consent. It's like, yeah, what world are you living in, jackass? Like, like, come on. But it's crazy because UKG, we have a dashboard, an online dashboard where we can view our pay stubs, our W-2s are on there. You can request sick pay, vacation time, all that stuff. Luckily, I work for a family-owned business, and as the company grows, it gets increasingly corporate and increasingly technology driven. But because it's a family-owned business, they don't utilize like the full spectrum of services that this dashboard offers. But you can still see on the dashboard that there's all these different categories and things that you can explore or have information input into. And a lot of it is like skills tracking, and
Oh, wow. That's what they're going to bet on.
it's all there.
Did you have badges yet?
It's not yet, but you can see like we don't use any of that stuff, but you can see that if it was utilized, it's just building the infrastructure for like the precision human capital, workforce, education, bond type stuff. And it's a corporation, right? And people are, it's like the corporate side of things. Everybody wants to say like, oh, they're a private company, they can do whatever they want. Yeah, they can do whatever they want. They're doing whatever they want, and they're all colluding to create these dashboards. This, like, the interoperability of it is there.
Yeah.
It's just a matter of sharing it and sort of setting a standard. And this seems to me like it's setting the standard for like workforce management and data collection, real-time data collection with skills tracking, and like imagine adding a blockchain factor to that.
Well, that's the
so
thing.
close.
Like I was just talking with my friend Joseph, who's like, he's sort of an expert in the whole blockchain and game design and, game theory and, actuarial, he knows like everything. And now he's trying to, interrogate it and surface it because he sees what's happening. But, we were talking again, we'd like to do a longer conversation on XAPI technology, because I had talked about this idea of this, in the education space. There used to be something called SCORM, SCORM, which was Shareable Content Object Reference Module. So if you were doing like an online learning program on a laptop, like a standard, like at this point, it would be just like probably outdated, online learning on a laptop, you would use SCORM, and that would interface that capture your results and upload them to what's called like a learning management, like from the learning management system to a learning locker. But it didn't work on any wearable technology or smaller devices like phones and tablets. So XAPI was developed to capture data from these other systems, which are increasingly supplanting laptops, right? Like you're doing stuff on phones and tablets. You're not really doing things on full service laptops anymore. So this XAPI technology actually works with virtual reality and haptics. So as they build out simulation training modules, and I'm seeing, like, I was seeing this a couple years ago, even in like retail training, like here's your module, put on your haptic suit and go through the training for how to sell a gas grill at Walmart, right? And like, then you're supposed to be in your haptic suit and you have to demonstrate your competency that you're engaging appropriately with this stuff. And like, I remember literally 3 or 4 years ago, seeing this in an education setting, it would be like an avatar teacher teaching avatar children. And people were cracking up because they couldn't imagine what that was even about. Well, now we know, now we know exactly what that was about, but it's starting to scale. So they were saying like, oh, well, if screen-based learning is so much cheaper than face-to-face learning, simulation learning is even cheaper than screen-based learning over time. And so they're like, well, and this is all military simulation. This is military technology that they're using. And so, and much of it is connected to how soldiers do simulations with wearable technology to simulate, various kind of battlefield engagements, right? They're leveraging that R&D into the corporate space. And now they're saying like, oh, it's not just you're jumping over a wall and, flushing out, enemy combatants, you're selling the grill at Walmart, but it's the same technology. And people don't understand that. And like, I have to say, even a lot of this is being developed in Finland. There's something called Valamis, which I had seen again several years ago, not understanding the scope, like how this was ever going to scale, but that you would be doing training modules in wearable technology. And the thing is the XAPI tracking your competency that you fulfilled emotionally or physically, what you're supposed to do, you've sold the grill, then goes into your learning locker. But the thing is that the data aggregation on all of that is actually being tracked. The blockchain tokens are also being accessed to feed into AI data sets. And these AI data sets are increasingly being linked together with blockchain through this program called SingularityNet. And SingularityNet is it Ben Goertzel, who developed Hanson Robotics, Sophia, the humanoid robot, of Saudi Arabia. Like, in addition to Sophia, the humanoid robot, and the scary thing about Sophia is the idea that when you have a blockchain brain that's connected to all the other blockchain brains, one humanoid robot learns something, and then all of them have immediate access to that skill. That's the hive mind brain in the robots, that they're actually also building, like linking these data silos for AI to trigger artificial intelligence services that are paid for in tokens, which are crypto. So like Joseph's whole thing is like beyond all of my arguments and like raising red flags about blockchain and crypto, is that actually the token economics of it are fueling literally the singularity, like the interconnectedness of these various data sets that we are generating through living virtual lives in virtual workspaces or virtual learning spaces are virtualizing us. It's just like you were saying, it's a predator parasitic thing laying on top of life. It is actually a parasitic thing that is pulling our data and then through blockchain, throwing it over to like make more Sophia the robots.
It's almost like the crypto blockchain thing was designed to feed the AI and drive the singularity. It's almost like it was designed on purpose by militarized technology systems.
That.
And I mean, I guess it's as good a time as ever. We can get into.
Well, can I say one more thing?
Yeah,
so Ben Goertzel's dad, and this is a creepy thing, his name is Ted Goertzel, because Ben Goertzel got his PhD in math from Temple University here in Philadelphia, which is unusual because like usually when you're seeing these high level mathematicians, like there's a handful of schools they're coming from. I have never seen anyone else come out of Temple. So I'm nothing, no shade on Temple, but it's unusual. This is an unusual pattern. His father was a professor of sociology at Rutgers University in New Jersey, which is not far away. His specialty was in, I think he was looking into conspiracy theory, but also cybernetic socialism. He has a whole paper from 2015 he gave in Spain about cybernetic socialism, which if you go back to Chile and you look at what was happening with Allende and Stafford Beers and Cybersyn, like that's been lurking around for some time. But even as early as 2015, Ted Goertzel is still talking about pitching blockchain socialism. And then he retires and moves to Marietta, Ohio, according to his webpage. So Marietta, Ohio doesn't really seem like a big retirement center. Like, like, I don't know if you were going to go, unless you had family there or something, like who's to say, maybe he has family there. I don't know. His son is in Hong Kong somewhere building robots. But Marietta, Ohio is one of the mound building cultures. Like there is one of these really significant mounds in Marietta, Ohio, that was one of the early Indian War like engagements with the Miami of Ohio. And I actually in graduate school, I was researching this guy, Josiah Harmer, who like had his, butt handed to him on a plate by the Miami, like he was run out of town because he was kind of a drunk and not a good guy. But like, I think it's fascinating that this military installation and this mound building culture are in Marietta, Ohio, and then suddenly Ted Gertzel, whose son is building robots and is pushing blockchain socialism, moved there. So this may just be all in a grand aside, but it seems very unusual.
There's no coincidences. It all comes together in some way or another. Yeah, the whole idea of like blockchain socialism, that's the data-driven governance that the 4IR nodes connect to. And like people are like, oh, data-driven governance, what does that mean? It's like, no, they want to put you on blockchain. They want you using crypto. They want to overlap our physical realm with the digital so that they can control us and turn us into automated versions of ourselves. But that's part of what I'm kind of labeling the crypto divide in the truth movement, or the opposition movement, is this idea that crypto is just a neutral technology. And that to me is an oxymoron. Like people are always like, it's almost like there's like these bots out there that anytime you talk about blockchain is like, the technology is neutral, it's how it's used. It's like, no, you're wrong. Because if one, the technology is not neutral. It's like, is an Abrams tank a neutral technology? Yeah, you could co-opt it and use it against the people who built it, or who are oppressing you, but it's still a mechanism of violence and destruction. So, you look at crypto and everybody's all over Bitcoin, right? It's like, oh, Bitcoin conveniently after the last financial collapse appears out of thin air, invented by somebody who does not exist. Satoshi Nakamoto is not a real person. And there's still people who are like, oh, did you read Nakamoto's paper about why you're wrong and why it's the best thing ever? It's like, okay, well, that person doesn't exist. So it appears out of thin air, goes through the ringer of all the social circles, all the social media circles. Like Reddit is a huge Bitcoin thing. When Reddit's owned by, I forget who bought Reddit a few years ago, but it comes out of China. But China's the big bogeyman, right? Everybody'd be afraid. Reddit, all the libertarians were on it for a second, all the usual kind of like grifters, and Alex Jones was pushing Bitcoin in like 2011. And if that isn't a red flag, then I don't know what is. But now it's like,
but even the idea of it being currency is just so distracting, because for the most part it's not meant to be. I mean, that's what I've said. I'm like, it's really about tokenizing rates and running geofencing of your body. It's like, it kind of is going to be some sort of version of a script, a behavioral script, but and I'm not saying it's not at all about currency. Certainly it's some, but if people are 95% of the time talking about it as crypto as a financial exchange, and they're not actually talking about tokens being used in terms of how you interface with the spatial web, that's a problem. And by this point in the game, more people should be talking about that,
Yeah. People put transactions on blockchain and they think currency, and it's transactions can be a lot more than just money exchanges. And if you look at, depending on your definition of currency can be energy or action. So yeah, it's going to track all of your transactions, but a transaction could be you getting on the bus and the Internet of Things monitor checking in to see if you paid your fare, or extracting your token for your bus fare. That's a transaction. Going to work could be a transaction. Clocking in can be a transaction. And it's so funny.
Well, I have a friend who does a lot of the really amazing, I think I mentioned her, Steffers, on A Piece of Mindful. Like, she does this military R&D, and she's like, Alison, I'm starting this 900-page book on transhumanism. And I'm like, oh, cool. And then she texts me like part of the table of contents, and it's there's a chunk on blockchain, right? And so the first one, I pull up the paper, the woman who's written this essay, and I think some of it may have been somewhat of a thought experiment, but literally they're talking about hive minds, accessing hive mind environments on blockchain. And in some ways, I kind of wonder if your dream wasn't a hive mind. And I sort of also like, because I've never done this on Facebook, but there's the room, like get a room, or I don't know, like I've never done a room thing,
Yeah.
but I'm thinking about it more, and I'm like, that's a hive mind. And there's like and they talked about being in a hive mind that was not just humans, but some entities in that mind room, whatever, would be machines, and that you would do collaborative problem solving, and that there would be a currency relating to your idea exchange or something like that. So like imagine that all being tokenized. Like, am I allowed to go in this room, and then what I produce in the room with people and machines then has a currency, and am I allowed to get out of the room, like until I produce, and it's all virtual, and they're increasingly, avatarizing people. And that's pretty intense. But again, when you think of it like, oh, it's not something that's super far off, it may just be literally a virtual space where people, like a Zoom call could almost be a hive mind space. Like you tweak it a little bit and you put it on blockchain, and then it becomes this different, it starts to pivot into something that becomes more abstracted.
It's pretty bizarre. And
Do you think I'm off base about that?
no,
Like it just kind of hit me. I'm like, I think maybe you were in one of those.
no, I think you're right on, because going back to the idea that this predator energy is sort of projecting onto our realm, our reality, our existence, human connection and like human existence has so many things about it that we don't even barely or can't even grasp yet. And I think that there's elements to this that we cannot see or know. But when it comes to human connection, and like, sure, spoken word is like the ultimate connection, conversation and stuff, but there's definitely some sort of like energetic exchange that can happen beyond space and time. Like humans are, we're perceiving a 3D reality, but I think we have quantum properties to our existence that we're
Well, and that gets to like just lately, I was just having a prickly day on Twitter. It was like with various engagements, and like, but one person was sort of like, "Well, I'm organizing people, and I'm not going to tell them that their kid like be so pessimistic that their kid's going to be a cyborg or whatever." I'm like, well, I think you can actually both know it and not presume it's going to happen, and to actually participate in some sort of energetic engagement to make that not happen, that may happen beyond a material realm. And like maybe that's why the left is sort of not helpful in this, because to them everything has to be reductive to a material thing. And I'm like, I think that this is beyond a strictly material situation. Like if we're engaging it, it's going to have to be something that is beyond us having more tanks or us having more money, or better crypto. It's going to be something that is about, I mean, I think it's a reckoning. I mean, to me, this is like, what is it to be human? And what is it to be human, knowing our obligation to other beings? Because that's the other crypto thing, is the environmental impact. And I talked with someone who was active in the space, and I was like, well, how do you mesh wellness with 5G and 6G? And they're like, well, it's probably not such a big deal, but you could have a line of clothing that was like EMF repellent or whatever. And I'm like, but I'm here for the bees. Like, what about everything else in the world that isn't going to wear a headdress, like to protect them from 5G rays and digital twinning? And, and so to me, and I know some people give me a tough time about it, being like, well, couldn't I just work the gray area? But to me, it's sort of like, you're going to have to choose, because if you choose a path that you center blockchain trust is what they call it. If you want to put your trust in a mechanical system, that is a very different path than one that is seeking to restore balance in a natural world. And I'm not going to say they're like, well, I'm definitely right or they're definitely wrong or whatever, but to me, it feels very hard to say, well, we'll kind of use it, because if you're going to actually try to restore the balance, doubling down on the mechanism, to me, it's hard to justify that, especially because there is a huge footprint to that. There's a huge environmental impact.
Yeah, I think that there's like a certain energy of knowing. And if you study like the movements of the predator energy, there's like a karmic contract kind of thing where the revelation of the method, like there's always clues or codes about what they're going to do before they do it, and then the sort of the breadcrumbs are laid out before you, and it's hard enough to like decode it and figure it out, but once you know it, you have a choice, right? Whether you're going to try to stand against it, or there's the gray area. And that's like, I'm right there with you when you're like, yeah, I see you, but you're going to have to make a choice. And people, the prevailing argument amongst these people who are like, you're trying to promote blockchain as a tool of liberation, they're like, oh, it's decentralized, and there's such thing, you just don't understand, there's decentralized blockchains and this and that. And again, going back to the fact that this is military technology, there are backdoors to all of this stuff. Nothing can truly be decentralized on the internet, period. No ifs, ands, or buts about it. Tor, the internet encryption, whatever. It's like, that's a military system too. So you don't think that there's tools that these systems can't be unlocked by those who might want to benefit from, or might want to stop a decentralized crypto network. It's like, yeah.
Well, and even Joseph has made the very clear point that they can, as they continue to consolidate supply chains and your access to material goods, which has been happening over lockdown as they increasingly push independent business and retailers out of business, and the Walmarts and the Amazons and the CVSs take over, is that they can, the federal government, or they can opt to simply only accept certain backed crypto, right? So you could have a giant stockpile of crypto that's useless because you can't exchange it for anything unless, like, if you're in a local community, off on your own. But then why do you need blockchain? Because if you have your own community, it doesn't have to be digital. Like, really, you have to, like, if you've built your own little rural collective over here and everybody, why are you putting your trust in that? Is that where you want to put your trust? Is that what you need? Because I don't think, like, we didn't used to need that necessarily. Like if you want to engage in globalist trade, well, then that's something, but that doesn't sound like a lot of what these liberation, like, Agora framework are talking about. Like, oh, I want to do globalized trust trade with, between Mexico and the Philippines. I mean, or maybe they are, and maybe that's why they need blockchain, but is it the same blockchain? I mean, do they have like a networked franchise of, I don't know. There's just a lot that's not clear.
It's like, can you blockchain like an exchange for a meal while somebody else agrees to play music for the event? Like, is that like, and it's funny because a lot of these people, I have a few in mind, but I don't need to name names, but like, they have like a positive energy about them, and a lot of the stuff that they're like about and seem like they live their lives, they're like set a good example for the human side of things, but then they're saying all these things about blockchain. It's like, okay, yeah, like, do you want to like write a poem and put it on the blockchain about like, it's just bizarre to me. I'm like, why do you need to, like, you have so many other things, right? You seem like a reasonable person. Why are you committing yourself into standing up for blockchain? Like, it just seems like, it's like, we know it's predatory. We know what it's being used for. We know where it came from. Stop pretending, like, there's certain hills to die on. And I don't think that choosing to think that blockchain is a tool of liberation is that hill. And obviously other people think otherwise, but
yeah, I know. I'm not at necessarily everybody's popular kids table. But the thing is too, and I will just say, like, I don't feel like I need, for the most part, people who have sort of dug in, I'm really not, I mean, I don't anticipate, unless someone comes up and says, oh, here's my, here's a whole new alternative way of running blockchain that I don't know. Like, you're right, it is military. Like, I don't think I'm really fundamentally going to change my position. I don't think other people are going to change their positions. So to like hash it all out doesn't really seem like a really good use of time when we could be talking about other things.
Yeah, it's a waste.
Like the hive mind brain thing is pretty scary.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's look at SoftBank, right? Like, they're doing that. They have access to, I watched, there's a documentary on Hulu, I think. Me and my fiance watched it, and it's on WeWork. And it's not like, it gets into some things, and it kind of, it touches on some good stuff. It gets into SoftBank, but it becomes like the personality thing. Like, it focuses on Adam Newman as like this eccentric, crazed genius. You know, it overemphasizes
okay.
his role in it, and then it brings in SoftBank, and it overemphasizes the CEO of SoftBank's role, and kind of like puts it
Okay.
as in it's like these people vision, and it doesn't
Right.
once mention that Adam Newman is and WeWork is a product of, you know, probably the Utopia program and Israeli intelligence and all that stuff. But he's really eccentric and he's so smart. But um, the part that stuck out to me was I didn't know that there's We Live. WeWork also had a We Live, I don't think it ever made it out of like little trial beta test pods.
Didn't
But
they also have a school? Did they talk about a school?
oh, did
I think they had a school version
they
too.
did? Yeah, they did. It was for, yeah,
It
yep.
was very attractive.
The wife, Adam Newman's wife, was piloting the school. I forget the name of it. It was We Work, We Live, maybe We Learn. I don't know.
Okay.
But yeah, and it kind of gave you a little peek at kind of how a digital spatial reality could be meshed in with like a workforce, like how I brought up like the techie workforce, how they were
Right.
already kind of in that realm a little bit. But I don't know. It's like you see, it's just funny. These people, they just miss it. It happens to them, and they're just like they were interviewing a guy who signed up for We Live, and he was just like, "It's the best thing ever." Blah blah blah. It seemed great, and like then he's like talking about how they never left their apartment building and they only hung out with each other, and anytime they would have an outsider over, that person would never come back. It would be a one-time visit, and I'm like, don't you see why that might be, you know? And like it was never like the true like reckoning of like, wow, this is insane. You know?
Well, it's interesting too because I put out like a blog post and I did a little revocation of consent last week with I have a friend who's a really amazing activist, like legit activist, not connected to any NGO, just doing the right thing on housing and gentrification in North Philly. And a key player in all of this for us is Project Home, which is with the Catholic Church. So it's kind of like the down market, I guess, version of whatever the WeWork upscale space is, would be like this idea of fragmenting community and creating these institutional spaces that are sort of very modest living environments, and some of it would be like co-housing or shared spaces, but they would only be available to people that met a certain criteria. Like, okay, this is the whole unit for veterans with PTSD, or this is the whole unit for aging out of foster care, or this is the whole unit for LGBTQ trans young people. And so there was no homogeneity. Like it's sort of like everyone is just pushed into this living environment. So then you're managed according to your wraparound services for these human capital as a service markets. But it's not really any kind of holistic community. There's not any sort of long-term life prospects in it. It's just like warehousing people as behavioral data. When you imagine like that clip that I keep sharing about the people nairs, people holding portfolios of human capital. Like I almost picture the people nairs portfolio, or like, here's this nonprofit institution that has this unit of housing that contains 50 bodies that are all performing this way in your portfolio. And like, that's the portfolio, is like not just of residential building facilities, but actually the human capital that's contained in them and their anticipated compliance to the programs. And like, that's the new currency, that's the new wealth in this digital slavery.
The data
And
extraction.
even though like I'm supposed to actually talk with Catherine Austin Fitts next month, but like she
Really?
speaks broadly of digital slavery, but I'm like, it looks a certain way. Like it looks like Project Home on 15th and Fairmount, with like, if you have a baby, you have to leave. That's what the digital slavery looks like.
Wow, I'm really surprised that Catherine would.
I said it couldn't be paywalled. I was not going to paywall it. So like, well,
we'll see. That's
we'll
interesting.
see. I mean, like I said, she knows Philly, I guess. So like,
Catherine, Mr. Global Austin Fitts.
well, I'm going to like say, this is what it looks like where I live.
I mean, that's it. I look forward to that. I mean, if she follows through, that'll be very interesting and insightful. Good for you.
I mean, because there's stuff about the opportunity zones. Like that's what's going to happen. Like there was, I can't remember, someone shared with me a documentary and it was looking at Detroit and like just the desolation of Detroit and the issues around like cutting off people's water and electricity and the privatization of the government and everything in Detroit. And as part of that, there was a scene where he's walking through the old Packard plant, which is this giant plant. And I think at one point, like there's a bridge that goes over a road that connects the two parts.
I'm actually
And
familiar with
my
it.
friend that is in Detroit said at some point someone put these panels that said like Arbeit macht frei, like over the thing. Like it was kind of creepy. She's like, it was like handmade. It wasn't fancy, but it was creepy. She's like, this was really, she sent me a picture. She's like, this is really creepy. But it's this guy walking through saying like, this is so much square footage. And they would get it for like, I think ultimately the deal fell through a number of years later, but you could see the wheels spinning of how it was going to go. They're like, you know, they got it for pennies per square foot. And they're like, you could live here, you could work here, you could go to school here. Like everything is like right in here. And the interesting thing is like that the Packard Foundation actually was behind some of the data zone in San Jose, setting up the interoperable data systems. It was the Packard Foundation. So, and the guy who was doing the walkthrough was actually, I think he was from Latin America. Like it was either Spain or Latin America, like was a foreign investor, but definitely like a Spanish speaking foreign investor. And he was like, this is what we're going to do. And it fell apart, but I'm like, these opportunity zones, they are going to roll in like the Blackstone, the BlackRock. They're going to sweep in, they're going to get all of this distressed real estate in the opportunity zones, or even if they don't buy up the existing real estate, they're going to, I'm pretty sure because there's money going into housing services now for workforce training, they're going to reskill people into trades for smart housing. But even that work is, I think most of it's going to be in like factory prepared, like prefab housing, and they're going to roll them out and just plop them into place and like hit them up with a couple staple guns and then just call it a day. And that's going to be the gulags. And that's, you know, it's like verticals. It's all verticals.
A few interesting local connections for me. I'll see if I can cohesively lay this out, but you're hitting some important points there. In San Francisco in the past year, despite the city being a complete dead zone and everybody leaving, one thing that's continued and really been emphasized is there's a few major construction projects ongoing and some have been recently completed, but basically very large, like skyscraper, 40 plus story, prefab, pre-furnished condos, like pseudo luxury condos, connected to workspace environments similar to WeWork. There's a handful, all sort of concentrated in the middle of the city. And I haven't figured out what corporations are involved, but they're basically empty. Like they take up entire city blocks. They're huge. They're massive. Nobody's moving into them yet, really. But then they have like stories and stories of office space that's all pre-furnished. Everything's like ready to go. And I can only think that I'd imagine that those pseudo luxury condos come with a smart TV, maybe a smart fridge, and probably a Peloton.
Yeah.
So
how about the mirror, like the one that you're supposed to jog in front of the mirror?
What is it called? I think it's called Mirror.
Okay.
There's also
the Black Mirror.
Yeah, I think that sounds about right. There's also a few in that same sort of district. There's a virtual reality gym and another like Orange Theory Fitness, which I think is like a data-driven fitness program.
Ooh, can I tell you something else?
Yeah, let's
real
go.
quick. So my other thing is like, I haven't written this up yet, but I made this map about when I went down to New York to participate in that rally. And at the end of Union Square Park, which is where it was, there was this crazy building that had this public art installation on it that dated to 1999. And it was very ominous. Like it took up the facade of like a 6-story part of this building. And it was a portal at the top with a hand over the portal, and around this portal were 36 circles of masonry, like rippling like a waveform, and gold flecks around the circle, and then it kind of spun out, like it sort of flickered out. There's a hand over the circle, and smoke comes out of this portal. And then at the bottom is a natural boulder that like hits the waveform, right? So we're talking like, and then there's a line coming out, and it's called metronome. So it's a time marking thing, but also a music thing, I think, right? And so, and the hand that's sticking out is a scaled up version of George Washington, that one of an early equestrian statue in the park opposite. So the equestrian statue is facing the piece of art, and he's got like this sort of Masonic hand gesture. And so they took the hand, they scaled it up, they stuck it on the building, smoke comes out, right? And then on the one other part of the facade is a small golden ball that is the moon cycle that somehow spins, like depending. And then on the other side is like an 11 window, like large windows with LED lights that was a clock. It was for a long time the atomic clock. So it was sort of abstracting time because it was so many digits, you couldn't really use it as a timepiece. But then last fall, they flipped it and made it the carbon budget countdown clock.
I know. Yeah, I've seen that.
So they like we had 7 years as of last September, and now it's counting down to the end of carbon-based life, I guess. Like it's crazy. And so like who did this? Who had this thing? So his name is Stephen Ross, and he's from Miami, but he's a major player. He spent his whole adult life in New York City real estate. And he developed a Time Warner Center in New York City, and Hudson Yards, which is the largest real estate development in the city. But his fortune is in affordable housing. And so he has Hudson Yards with like Amazon, JP Morgan, Accenture, like all the people who are getting Sidewalk Labs. Google Sidewalk Labs is in Hudson Yards. And the Vessel, this crazy other art piece, which is like this hive mind vessel thing. But then he has this, and he runs fitness clubs. He owns several high-end fitness clubs. Okay, so it's all the wellness stuff is coming together. And then anyway, he would like host at Hudson Yards all of these charity events. But all the charity events were like things like these wraparound services, right? Like helping the poor, getting them on the pathways. And it's crazy. And the artist that did it, this thing in 1999, the same year in New York, installed hundreds of mosaic tile eyeballs all in the subway station under the World Trade Center. And it's called Oculus. The same year. So Oculus is under the World Trade Center. Metronome is at Union, which is the center, my understanding of like public protest, like that Union Square Park was like the center of like labor organizing and protest. So it's out, like it is just staring, this portal is just staring at the space where you protest. And that Oculus, those mosaic tiles are still there because I went back like for that event that we did, Wine Council on Foreign Relations, and we got out in Lower Manhattan, and I saw the eyeball, and I'm like, it didn't get destroyed. That artwork did not get destroyed. It's still under there.
It's like, what told them to do that?
I know. Well, that's what I'm like. Is there a time warp? Like, because they're playing with time. Like, I think there are definitely things. At the one hand, I'm like, oh my gosh, this stuff is all happening. It's happening really fast. It's really unfolding. But then on the other time, I'm like, we need to be deliberate and thoughtful and not rush into things because we feel like we don't have enough time. Like, because I think there's some play. I think there's play going on. Time
isn't the dominant factor. It's the perception. Yeah. I think that's what I've been feeling like this year, 2021. I've kind of almost relinquished my concept of reality. I'm just taking it sort of day by day, week by week. But I was riding my bike home today, and I was like, this time thing, like this, there's definitely something going on. Like ever since the conjunction, the Great Conjunction or whatever, I remember looking up at that, and I was like, I've written a few kind of stream of consciousness thoughts on it, but I'm like, I don't know what changed. I can't define it, but it's different. And there's of course all kinds of other questionable experimental things going on in the secret space of quantum computing and particle acceleration, and you know, people openly talking about quantum computers pulling information from other dimensions. But you know, that that's sort of its own thing. But
see, and that's why, like, I feel like if everything is on the table, like if there is some like, if there's a predator force out there, there's got to be some force that counterbalances it out
Absolutely.
there too, right? So like if we, and I don't think that we have to be in a position of knowing how it all works, like that we don't have to be expert quantum physicists or, like, but if you come at it from the heart space, like from an authentic, like authentically engaging in the process of knowing how fucked up everything is and trying to want it to start to be better, like from a truthful position, like to me that seems like the most powerful. I mean, I don't know, you know the whole dandelion, like our dandelion manifestos and the revocations, it's like, maybe all I've got is a pile of dandelions, right? And I'm going to go, scrub the steps of Bloomberg Philanthropies. But I'm going to put an impression of like a revocation there and that we're not doing this.
Yeah, I think that like being human, and there's all sorts of way, like the intention of what you're talking about, but also just sort of living in the natural world, loving each other, or like experiencing good things is the most powerful force. For example, my fiance and I went up to Bodega Bay up north along the coast, and we walked onto the beach, and there was families like gathering with their kids and hanging out, and there was like a lot of laughter and positivity around us, and we just sat down and looked at the ocean and just had like that natural connection. And I was going to say, like, that was when time didn't feel like it was different, or it didn't feel like it was rapid and accelerating. It was just like we were on the beach for probably an hour and a half, but it felt like an eternity. It was like a lifetime, like we came back fulfilled and just like so happy with just simple, and like we talked, we had conversation, but we also just people watched and sat around and just soaked up the sun. We're like, this is so beautiful. And like doing that, I think, is just like more of that too, because what has pandemic scenario done to people? Isolated them in their homes, put them on screens, got them more addicted to social media and all these things, and taken them away from that. And if there's less people engaged with that, then that's more energy being harvested for that predator force, right? So
Exactly.
that's like
That's nice. That sounds beautiful. We
yeah.
went on a hike this weekend with like a group, our soup group. Someone organized a little hike. And so we, it wasn't really strenuous, but we came around and there was a vernal pool, which is, I love that word vernal, right? There was like a vernal pool full of frogs, like all these different kinds of frogs. And we we're standing like at the edge, like looking at, like listening, and it was on a bit of a road, like an access road, and this car comes and we're like, oh, get over, there's like a car coming in. So we were like stepping aside, and then the car stopped and the person got out, and it was like the park ranger. And then all of us, like 10 of us, we just like froze, because like clearly we're not like, whatever, probably a following official protocol of whatever group gatherings. But this person was just super excited to tell us about the frogs. Like they were just, they're like, I've been waiting all winter to talk to people. Like, here, let me tell you, like, let me tell you about this frog and that frog and, this one and that one and this plant. Like, we dug this out by hand because it was silting up, and I'm so proud of these frogs. And I'm like, that's awesome.
Y'all found the frogs, I see. Well, let me tell you.
Yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah, I was like channeling some inspiration from some of what you've done with the dandelion concept and the revocation of consent thing. And I'm like, that's definitely powerful. And I'm like, how can I incorporate that into like my life, my approach? And I was like, I think I want to go down to the Presidio, to the Center for the Fourth Industrial Revolution, with my fiance or with some friends or with a group. And I'm like, let's go sit on the porch and drink a beer and just like hang
I
out
like that.
and have a good time. Maybe I'll leave a note or something of some intention, or like let them know, like, I see you guys. I'm not doing it. So yeah, it's like, I know what you want to do, but I'm gonna do the opposite and like live my life and drink this beer on your stoop and like hang out and enjoy the world around me. So like that's on the agenda soon. Unfortunately, my schedule got changed this week and I have to work on Saturday. So next weekend maybe.
Oh, that sounds great. Yeah, one of the other guys I was talking to last week or so, he's in Richmond, and I'm like, and he was all about cornhole. He's like, I just want a frisbee and corn, and I'm like, that's awesome. Like, could you maybe take it to the Richmond Fed? Like, he's like, I will think about it. That would be a nice counterbalance. Your beer and that their frisbee.
Perfect. And then it's across the coast. It's everywhere, like we're all that energy, putting it out there and coalescing. It's like gotta do something. And it doesn't have to be like overly radical all the time, you know.
No.
Um,
Yeah. No, I agree.
Going back to the local factors, especially with like the housing and stuff like that, recently had an interesting experience. So like a year ago, probably to the day almost, like last April, early pandemic scenario, right in front of the San Francisco like City Hall, like the whole Civic Center area, um, a bunch of unhoused people, like hundreds, I want to say, sort of gathered on one specific street, and they were
Mhm.
left alone for a while. It seemed by design, of course. Um, they sort of took over this whole corridor right like adjacent to City Hall, and they were there for a while, just sort of living their lives. And eventually, and I used to commute past it every day on my bike, and then eventually, suddenly, chain link fence was put up, like basically blocking off the entire corridor, like the entire two like wide street area.
Wow.
But the unhoused people were still there, but they closed them in.
Like
And
a
there
pen?
there was some sort of like vetting process or something, like if you want to stay, this is what you have to do, kind of thing. And so this was set up by um, a nonprofit called Urban Alchemy,
Ooh,
and they are
alchemy, huh?
yeah, they're basically the SF government's uh, unofficial like homeless services branch of like outreach, and they do all kinds of like weird little things. Like they have people, I think, in like who they pull from like treatment programs and like uh, uh formerly unhoused people and probably people in housing programs, and they like just send them around the streets with like a bucket and a broom and like make them clean the streets. But so Urban Alchemy is running this camp, this encampment. They call it safe sleeping villages. And so this whole corridor of right in front of City Hall is blocked off, and they're very secretive. They have like press releases and official photos and stuff, but they don't tell you what's going on or what it takes to be accepted into a safe sleeping villages. I've heard whispers of mandated testing, other biometric factors, that sort of thing, but I can't verify any of it. But so I saw this thing get constructed a year ago, and I was riding my bike home from work a few weeks ago, and I saw the safe sleeping village, and I kind of was like, I haven't like looked inside because the fencing is tarped off. You can't just look directly inside.
Oh, wow.
But there was some Jersey barriers on the outside. So I climbed up on the Jersey barriers, and I took a couple photos just to kind of see what was going on. They had like socially distanced encampment allocated setups. But as I was like just taking a few photos for like a few seconds, one of the workers inside freaks out, tells me, "Yeah, you can't be taking photos. That's illegal." He comes outside and is like in my face, and he's like, "You can't do that. You can't take photos of this place. It's illegal. It's not allowed." And
What?
dude, I'm on the sidewalk. I don't know. Like, I'm not in your little prison complex. Maybe you can tell the people in there what the rules are, but I'm just in the public space I can take photos of whatever. And he was losing. He's like, we're gonna call law enforcement and see what they think. I'm like, really, man? Like, you're gonna go ahead. Like, I'm gonna ride home in a minute anyways. But if you want to get that upset about it, but basically, the Urban Alchemy, the founder of it, founded in 2018, is best friends with London Breed, San Francisco's mayor, of course. So it's all like predispositioned. San Francisco's $330 million a year with homeless services gets funneled into these nonprofits. They basically do nothing. My fiance said that she took an Uber home a few weeks ago around the same time frame, and the Uber driver told her that um, there was purposely he like canceled a ride request for like the next on the queue while he was dropping her off, and he's like, "Oh, yep, another one of these." Every time that they take us to Brisbane, which is like 30 minutes south of San Francisco, it's this, they have us pick up homeless people and drop them somewhere else. as if they're being picked up in San Francisco at certain locations and dropped elsewhere. And it's
What?
kind of like a trafficking thing. And there's been other stories about buses and stuff coming into the city and dropping off unhoused people and all sorts of, there's some weird human trafficking things. So you would think that Uber is being complicit in some of these weird like human interchanges, which are undoubtedly being filling some data extraction sort of exercises.
Wow. Oh, that's overwhelming. I
Yeah.
mean, the thing is, like, my friend Jen, who is just like another regular person who's not affiliated with any nonprofit, and she is like just very like strong, like smart, principled, and they had a second encampment. I was part of our she in a very small way. They had an occupation of the housing authority in 2019, and then there was another dual occupation of not too far from my house on the Parkway, and near another one near the headquarters of the housing authority over last summer into the fall. And it's really interesting because, again, it was quite a large gathering of people, at least the one on the Parkway, several hundreds of people, and it wasn't really managed by by the kind of entity that you were talking about. And as far as I know, that there were really no significantly negative health impacts, right? These are people living not in tent conditions with not a lot of access to running water and everything else. And, you would imagine if this was something, a really serious health circumstance, that the people who are in the most vulnerable positions or whatever would have very, very bad outcomes. And that was not the case. So I keep wondering when people are going to wake up to that. But anyway, they kept leveraging towards the end to negotiate them, because it was sort of an embarrassment to the city in this very prominent public location to have so many people. And clearly people needed housing, and we have a lot of vacant housing in the city that could be renovated, but they're flipping it to developers, right? Because they want to really warehouse unhoused people who they can manage for treatment services in their own settings, right? In the ones that their nonprofits contain. So they were trying to negotiate that, and they were like, no, we just want housing. We don't want your programs. No, thank you. Like the community wants shelter. We don't want all the other stuff. We don't want the stuff you're pushing on us. That's not what we need. We just need housing. We're unhoused people who need houses. And you would think that was the most irrational ask, was to simply that unhoused people need a house. They don't need to be put on a pathway. And and our city is deeply embedded, as many cities, many of them, but particularly run by Democrats. That's how it goes. So they were able to prevail, and I think get like a community trust to get houses set aside for them in some way that was outside of what the city wanted to have done, per se. But this is the struggle, like the control of access to housing, particularly in the light of evictions. And like you said, like there are these huge developments that are furnished, that are sitting empty, right? But like nobody's going to give people a house, right? They're going to just like ship them around in Ubers to different tent cities or tiny houses. It's just insanity.
Yeah,
The system is broken.
the system is broken, and yet we keep trying to like I love the the activist approach, or like the often like leftist approach of like, oh, organize and lobby your local politicians. And I'm like, wait,
They're all in on it.
the people who are clearly pushing this system forward, like you want to think that they're going to help you and not give you the runaround. But the third thing local is recently opened up in Oakland is Tiny House Village. And it has another name. It has like a whimsical name, but it's Tiny House Village, and it's unhoused or marginalized youth. It's focused towards youth, and I think there might be an LGBTQ trans approach, like arm of it too, but it's youth-centric housing, tiny house village. And I'd imagine that those tiny
I mean,
houses,
to me, like it feels predatory too. Like, one, I think that these tiny houses will ultimately be set up with all the Internet of Things sensors, like the casita version in Austin. We're going to roll these off the assembly line like cars, right? Like little, trendy, they won't be trendy, but they like to pitch them as like they're, mid-century modern, your perfect freight container home.
Yeah, I had some
And
friends.
the real thing is not going to be like that.
I had some friends who like got the chance to like paint and like do artwork on the tiny homes and in the village, and I'm like, hey, like that's good. Like I like the activism, and like the idea is good. Like, and of course, like letting local artists, express themselves and give them a space to gather and stuff. Like, of course, there's good elements to it, but that's how all these things work. It's always gonna incorporate some of that, some of the good human stuff. Be like, see, we're human too. Come do some artwork, and then live inside this Internet of Things tiny home pod, like.
And no one's going to have their whole life in a tiny home. I mean, that was sort of what Jen was saying about the housing, like that they were taking away scattered site public housing, that people would have a voucher to directly access a scattered site house that could hold a family. And then those were being, like the houses were being given to developers, and the right of the housing voucher was being assigned to these larger facilities, which were small. So like, she's saying no one is going to spend their whole life in one of these facilities. Like you can't have friends over, you can't have a partner, you can't have children visit, like or grandkids, you can't have a beer, like there's all of these rules. So while it might be useful in a short window of time, you're not going to live there for any chunk of time. You can't have a life. And that's the same with youth villages. It's like then they become disconnected from a larger community network. I mean, they might have some solidarity of being just among youth, but is that a healthy society when you start to silo off different subsets of people by age or, the social stuff they're navigating, or income or race? Like if you just like, this is the village for those people, like that, I think that's a really dangerous precedent.
Seems kind of segregational, right? Just like
pretty much.
Just like health passports.
But if it has a good art, a good, nice, cute mural on it, it just makes it so much more palatable.
Yeah, exactly. It's like these are tools of segregation, just like vaccine passports, health passports, whatever. And again, like going back to you and like talking about tools of empire and continuations of empire and cellular colonization, like we need to apply the principles of what so many of us kind of are intimately familiar with, especially when it comes to like progressive growing towards like a human goal of recognizing the past and reconciling it and moving forward with the intention of building something better. But yet all these things are playing out where it's all around us, and man, it gets overwhelming.
Somebody mentioned, I just want to, because it was a really good point. A couple people had mentioned to me about, because it seemed to go along a bit with the trafficking stuff, that these health passports, like then the biometric data, the biometric, like, if they start to sync with your electronic health records, gosh, for organ harvesting, like there's some scary stuff that goes along with having your biometrics tracking your every whereabouts.
Yeah, absolutely.
There's a lot of really, and then in addition to that, also the fact that, because I know Newsom is all about all the trauma screenings and the ACEs, the adverse childhood experiences, getting that's going to be all on your electronic healthcare record too. And then what happens if you're, somebody who's in a vulnerable situation who has a really traumatic history, and then that gets handed over to your social workers that are like run by, institutions that may have bad histories, right? Like, I mean, the head of the impact investing for the Catholic Relief, Services Impact Investing Fund is out of the Boston Archdiocese, right? Like what happens when the Boston Archdiocese gets a hold of all the kids, blockchain, healthcare and social emotional records. And, no one's really thinking about that at this point.
It's like they'll blockchain the history of abuse or trauma of the children, but are they going to blockchain their own abuse of the children?
Yeah.
Probably not. Interestingly, mentioning social workers, somebody close to me with a kid in elementary school, after a year of distance learning where they're completely disconnected, wants them to repeat their grade this upcoming school year because they feel like they regressed and it was lost and it was worthless. And if they want their child to really get back to the path that they were on and like continue growing, they were like best to repeat the grade and not just sweep it under the rug and pretend like nothing happened and, you know, hope everything's fine. And they advocated for this, and the school not only sort of fought them for it initially, like said like, no, like let's not do it, blah, 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 multiple meetings. Basically, it came down to, okay, well, if this is something you want to do, we have to get a social worker involved. And it hasn't gone beyond that yet, but that's where it stands. And that was the ultimatum of
The
like,
quiet threat.
yeah, is this something you really want to do? Because we can do it if you want to, kind of thing, and we hold the power. So that's just a side
Well,
note.
and then, you know, all of the progressive teacher groups, they were all pushing, we want more social workers in the schools, you know, and like, clearly I know that the police in the schools, that's a concern, but if you are imagining that, you know, and nothing against individual social workers as people, I don't think people go into social work because they're expecting to make big bucks, but, you know, and they would like to do things for the right reasons, but they are extensions of the state. Like, they keep their job by doing the will of the state. So, you know, that's how it goes.
Yeah, extensions of the state. And that's, again, just recognizing things for what they are. You know, goes
Yeah.
a long way. I was having a lot of thoughts lately about, well, I listened to your dyslexia bill talk with the What's Left folks, and that was really, really enlightening, really like powerful. That was one that
Thank you,
really,
because like hardly anyone listened to it. And I'm like, this is really important. I know it's dyslexia. You think it's not relevant. Not you, but like most people. But I'm like, it actually is super relevant.
that I was gonna say, not that I care so much about like the metrics and views and stuff, but I watched that video probably a day or two after it was published, and I thought that because I hadn't refreshed the page on my tab, that I was like early on it, like, you know, within the first couple hours that I had loaded the video, and it had like 300 views, and I'm like, wait, people usually watch your stuff, you know, like a lot of people do get engaged with it. And I was like, wait, this is like one of the best ones I've, like the most prominent, like real time, like this is happening kind of thing. I'm like, what the hell is it? Is the algorithm like that smart where it knows like, nah, people shouldn't watch this one, you know? It's
Well, I
too
think
bad.
that people like, I mean, and that's the thing. I'm struggling even within my own household situation because people are, you know, it's hard. Like, it's not like, I don't fight with people about it, but I do this because it needs to be done. And I feel like I'm affecting things. Like, I feel like I'm giving people an analysis that is helping more people understand what it is, but it is everything. It is every aspect of the world, including dyslexia, right? Like, any given thing, you can sort of tease it out and go, okay, it fits here. And here's the constellation of all the things that where it interconnects. So yes, it is dyslexia, and you may not have a school age child. You may not, but if you understand the World Bank doing this predation on children, on the next generation, like, we should all care. But, you know, so anyway, thank you for watching.
Yeah, absolutely. And the dyslexia thing is really interesting. It kind of coalesces or like goes hand in hand with like the autism stuff that I mentioned
Mhm.
last time, and like the idea that distance learning in this virtual environment's like inducing a form of autism in children and all this stuff. And in both cases, both people who diagnosed with dyslexia and people diagnosed with on the autistic spectrum are some of the most intelligent, emotionally intelligent, intuitive, like genius individuals that I've ever met in my personal life in both of those realms. And it seems like the targeting of these things for data extraction and human capital type approaches and capturing them into pathways is intentional, the same way the
That's
Israel,
interesting. I hadn't thought about it that way, to like use their gifts to advance empire as opposed to undermine it.
both either, yeah, like capture it to utilize, or sort of like knowing that,
Neuter it.
yeah, exactly. And the what you said about a post literacy world was like giving me chills, because it goes a lot along with like some of the feelings some sort of like intrinsic feelings I have towards the predator energy and what the nature of that is. And how, think of spoken word versus typed word, or even written word
Yeah.
versus typed word? Like, what differences, what form of manifestation is that? Because, not to get quasi-religious, but if you think of words, spoken words, as a form of creation that we're putting into the
Mhm.
world, then what's, if words are creation, spoken words creation, then what's a text message? You know, what's a
Mhm.
what? And so, like, hijacking the natural human systems of connection, of communication, would seem like a high level goal of a predatory energy that is capturing human existence.
Yeah. You know, it's interesting because I'm trying to like there's that speech about what is it, goddess and the alphabet, or like looking at like language and visuals, and also women, like the marginalization of women versus the image versus the lexicon of the alphabet, and some like the word spelling stuff. And I still am not quite clear on that, because then some people are like, oh, so now we're getting better now because all of, you know, we're getting rid of words and we're moving to images, but it's like memes and things, which feels a little bit like
Yeah.
not great. But yeah, the idea of language, you know, we're talking about even having a language to articulate what worldviews, um, an emotion, right? Like the emoticons, right? Like I just chafe on all the social media, like which of these 20 icons represents how you're feeling now. And then there's this channeling into this like tiny little box of like, I don't want to like even pick that thing, but it does get normalized. It gets really normalized. So then you don't even use your words anymore. You engage on this one click sort of basis. And then it becomes very disconnected. Um, you know,
Yeah, I think,
yeah, it is. It's channeling the nature. It's changing the nature of our social relationships.
and I think, like, if you look at like Terrence McKenna and like his DMT experiences and his descriptions, he sort of takes it as like this enlightening, beautiful thing. Like, his DMT trips were always so enlightening to him, or whatever, and that's great for him. But he talks about the DMT elves, the machine elves, the fractal elves, or they're all sorts of names, the entities on the other end, or
Uh-huh.
in the other dimension. And he describes how they communicate with him, and they basically communicate telepathically through symbols and colors. So, like, this hyper advanced form of like speech and communication, right? And he would talk about how basically them doing that was trying to like show the human how to do it, or like push them towards that realm. And I'm like, okay, let's just assume for a second that like there is a predatory energy embodying high technology, and it has these abilities to communicate. While he took it as like this advanced, beautiful thing, what if it's just taking away our natural gift and absorbing us into its simplified little, you don't get to actually like have a conversation and express yourself. It's just colors and symbols and shapes, you know. Like, I don't know, I like looking at a person and talking and like seeing their face, not really like seeing a square
Yeah.
turn into a tetrahedron and have rainbow
No, I
spectrum.
use my hands all the time. Like,
Yeah, I'll
if
take
I
the
had to like
hand.
talk without my hands, it would be a lot harder. Um, Interesting. Well, you know, and that like reminds me of these images of like the Ian Akilda's, that slide share of the internet of bio nano things, which I share quite often. And it's like a young guy in a living room kind of setting, and you know the devices are all gone and they're just like dots, you know, a dot matrix of like, you know, the image. You no longer have a smart TV; it's just the wall with dots on it, or your thinking is dots and your body is dots, and I mean, when I was looking at this dyslexia stuff, and if I hadn't read those papers, if I did not know that the end goal is biocomputing, like it's this mesh of both turning people into machines and allowing the machines to learn the people, you know. And so I think so much of this scientific research that's been pursued, both in like brain science and in cancer research, you know, in the gene sequencing, it's all this dual use, right? And so on the one hand, it's like, how do we build a better computer that's like the brain, you know, how, and then how can we turn people into some things that are more like computers? And it is this cybernetic blending. And I think it's happening in such a way that people are not fully aware of the end goal. Like no one, if you hadn't seen these papers about the internet of bio nano things, you would have no clue that anyone had even been thinking such things. And yet they have for probably 20 years. And that's, if that is a kind of communication, of a symbolic communication, maybe these people who are building it understand, have had such experiences, right? Have tapped into this and are trying to bring that technology into the general public consensus. And they need, a framework to do that. And so, like, for goodness sakes, I sometimes wonder, are we being poisoned environmentally so that they can give us the cancer, so then they can like do these cheap therapies, all of which is like these layered profit centers for corporate extractivism. But if it's this predator energy that's involved, potentially, like,
the harvest is fueling the whatever.
It's wrapped, it's like layered.
It's materialized, it's helping the force materialize, and like the harvest is just part of the process. But again, we know what the end game is. And interesting what you said about like they've known for 20 years, and honestly, I've been focusing on it more, like DARPA's work in the 40s and 50s and 60s. Mm-hmm. And this goes back to Childhood's End by Arthur C. Clarke, where he had connections to that DARPA circle and like naval intelligence and stuff like that too, where in Childhood's End, he's talking about, he gets into like the ESP of humans, like extrasensory perception and stuff. And the alien force or whatever ends up like telepathically communicating with the children, like the children who end up being absorbed into the black cube or whatever it is. But again, going back to like the creation of the internet, ARPANET and stuff like that, it's almost like they found something, like in their exploration of the digital space, like they found something and they knew it was there. And there's also like all kinds of crazy stories about, MK Ultra and DMT experiments and LSD of like mapping other dimensions. And I'm not super well versed in any of that, but just residual stories around that subject. Like it's like they found something and they're trying to, like, they've touched it, they interfaced with something, and they're trying to find the way to like permanently bring it forth. And that's what like transhumanism and the spatial web, like the web of like the dots on the wall and your dots, like just like recreating humanity through computers. Like why is that a thing? Seems kind of weird. And like the acceleration of events and technology and the growth, I'm like, do you think it's normal that we have like these devices in our hands that require rare earth mineral mining and precious metals and connect to satellites? Like, is this normal? Like, this is not normal, guys. Like, come on. Like, it's, and like we still have.
I know. I thought I was really normal until like that last year. Like, I'm like, I had a handle on like educational surveillance and poverty management and the finance. And then, my gosh, I didn't even know. I mean, I do a teeny tiny bit about transhumanism, teeny tiny bit. I was like, what the heck is this? I can't even imagine people would think about uploading your consciousness. That's kind of about as far as I went. And then this past year has just been, I'm like, okay, so what if actually the financialization, the blockchain tokenization, the socialized medicine, what if it's all about like inverting our beingness into this silicon state, right? Or the one world religion. Like, what if all of these forces at work aren't really like, surely there's profit motives built in, surely there's social control mechanisms built in, but what if the end game is simply this pivot into life being converted into a different electrical system?
The profit motive.
And against our will, like against most people's knowledge or consent.
The profit
and that's
motive,
increasingly what it feels like.
I agree. It's exactly what it feels like to me. The profit motives are just the fuel for the fire that's going to build up and create this other thing. Like, it's like alchemy, like reverse alchemy of human life. Like the profit motives and the social control are all like harvesting and creating different energies that are being channeled into something that is not this. It's not this.
And that's why when people say, Alison, what are we supposed to do? Like, what are you doing? And while, like, again, I don't mean to in any way like look down on people who are developing like intentional community, or like reigniting, knowledge of older ways, or permaculture, or, off-grid living, or all of these things. That's all really great. But I'm like, ultimately, if this thing comes down to this transhumanist moment, all of those things are not going to change that outcome. So some of us, at least, who are of a mind to do that, need to figure out what the spiritual engagement looks like, what an energetic engagement looks like. And that's what I'm struggling. And I don't claim to be any expert in any of this. I'm really just kind of winging it.
Yeah.
But like, I'm like, I know I can't go play their game on their terms. Like the game, if we stay in the game on their terms, our options are not good. So how do we reframe the game in a way that is advantage to natural humans?
Yeah, we got to play the game that we know, that we instinctively that's been bestowed upon us, right? Like living, being alive in this realm. Like we need to utilize, maybe there's more that we need to connect to and sort of draw out and work towards, but playing their game is not going to get us there. And that's like the whole blockchain thing. Like
or playing the white hat version of their game either.
Yeah, like it's not that, it's never that. It's still going to bring it forth. Like that's like the same, it's sort of history fractalizing and repeating itself. But since we're getting real fringe, if folks are into it, like, or if they're not, they're probably already turning it off by now. But I was thinking about like what you said about like poisoning the environment. Obviously, like that is clearly happening, whether it's just a residual side effect of corporatization and wealth and profit motives and all those things, like, polluting the environment and all that sort of thing. Like, obviously we know that's happening, or whether it's intentional is another question. But I was thinking about, in terms of the classic idea of like a fake alien invasion. All it would take for a fake alien invasion would be releasing some of like the automated autonomous drones, robots, and then with control of the internet and media, like just broadcast certain types of imagery, and who knows what kind of like projection type technology. And like,
right.
if you've ever seen a SpaceX launch where the rockets like putting off crazy pulsing purple waves into the sky, and people are like, what the hell is going on? You combine those things in a somewhat orchestrated way, and then like just like we saw with pandemic scenario, how quickly some society is rapidly transformed. My friend, I was talking about this like a year ago with my friend, where he sort of asked me like, oh, do you think if there is a fake alien invasion, how far out do you think it would be? And I was like, if it were to happen, like 5 or 10 years. And he's like, what, that soon? I'm like, dude, have you been alive? Are you living through this too? Because it seems like things are getting crazier by the second. And there's literally,
I was gonna say 5 to 10 years seems like kind of a stretch, like far out.
I was revisiting that statement now. I'm like,
maybe 3 years. I don't know, 2 or 3. I don't know. Once they get the other blank check Cayman Islands human capital bond accounts on.
Yeah, exactly. I'm like, yeah, 3 tops maybe. But hopefully we'll channel something else that'll make their plan fail terribly. Like the funny thing is that like all these systems do require like electricity and other forms of like extracted energy, so it's like it could all just you turn on the switch and then it just boom, like
right. Well, the thing that I still can't quite figure out is like the frequencies in shaping people's mindset, around things. And it feels like the signals intelligence, this manipulation is, I don't know the particulars of how it works, but the more data that they collect, the more genomic material on people, like, and then adding in the quantum COVID computing, like they have like a COVID quantum computing program, like that's not going to be good, because they will be able to target people in ways that I think the general public would have no clue about. They really wouldn't. And if it's bad now, imagine what it's like in a year or two.
Yeah.
Because they'll have that much more data.
At the end of our last talk, we sort of like touched on this sort of thing where you brought up signals intelligence, and I'm like, yes, that's there's something going on here kind of thing, just like kind of you said about messing with time and stuff. Like there's definitely
I feel like New Jersey, like I want to go all over New Jersey, because like New Jersey seems like such a boring state, but it's like Bell Labs, right? And there was the RCA Victor, and like when I was going up to New York on the bus, I literally both trips, and I've driven with my husband, and maybe it was just because I was higher up, but like I've gone up to New York probably 2 or 3 times a year for years, right? And I'm in this section of the highway, and I look over both trips like within a few weeks of each other at the exact time I look up and look out the window, like not even meaning to. And there is this naval intelligence center north of Philadelphia in Moorestown that is the most bizarre. It's like a regular building, like a Walmart shipping center or something like that. But on the top of it is like a naval ship, like the top of a ship with a radar. Like, so it's like you plucked the top of this Navy ship and put it on the top of a warehouse building. It's very weird. I mean, it's very noticeable. And I'm like, what is that? And it's, near Princeton, and there's a lot of this, advanced technology systems and radar frequency systems. And I don't know, like, I mean, there's part of me with the whole Rutgers and some of the other stuff with Philly. I'm like, I don't know, some of the mystical stuff, some of the like Kabbalah stuff, some of this other stuff going on, like that's even more of a loop, throwing things for a loop. But like, I think there is this sort of mystical time bending stuff, and I don't know how it all works, but it feels like I'm just throwing it all in the pot,
You and I are definitely on the same page. It's like, it's hard to articulate the feeling of kind of thinking that way, or not knowing, but like getting the feeling of like there's something more going on here. But like that's all my thoughts around like 2 years ago I was like thinking about Bill Gates and the powers that be and Zuckerberg and stuff like that, and now I'm just like, is the Earth a planet? Who knows? Like
are we a thought in the consciousness of
like what is the definition of like all that stuff, and like the mystical factor of it, and like astrology and like astrological alignments and the way events play out on Earth, and wondering how much of television is computer generated imagery and like having not to sound like a paranoid schizophrenic or anything, but like I'm not convinced one way or the other, but the thoughts that I'm having, the questions that I'm like naturally occurring to me are just like the tangible reality is, like I said about going to the beach and just like enjoying that, like that was the most like
real,
the most truthful like experience I've had in a long time, of just like, other than like going to bed at night and waking up next to my partner, like like little simple life things, but going to work and stuff, everything's just so weird. People are weird. People have like weird energy about them, like talking about the vaccine and asking me if I'm vaccinated, and just like,
oh no, it's
like,
hard.
guys, like it's great that you have like a positive attitude and you have a happy tone, but this is not normal. Like, please, like, and I don't want to be mean, like I don't want to be mean, but we're just like, it's just different.
I know. Well, it seems like things have sort of bifurcated, and that's where I'm at, even like within my, and it's hard because my young adult, like they can't handle it really. And so, and it's a lot. Like if I were 20, like I would be like, oh my gosh, like, but I can't not do that. Like, I think they would prefer me not to do this thing. And I'm like, at this point, I don't think I cannot.
It's also overwhelming, like,
it's so like navigating that's really hard in a respectful way.
It's like, I think the only reason I'm able to like think about all this stuff and maintain like a somewhat normal life, go to work and have friends and circles, like if I didn't grow up somewhat in the real world of like playing in the woods and not having a phone and not being exposed to social media until like my later teens, I couldn't imagine trying to navigate this space of reality that we're in without, falling into a narrative one way or the other, or whatever it is. It's all very, very strange. And man, there's a lot going on. It's a lot to unpack.
It is.
I wanted to share, I after your mushroom story, your mushroom soup story of our last talk, I had an interesting interaction around mushrooms. One of my regulars at work, who I've probably comes in like every other Sunday, or like come across him once a month every Sunday for years, like 2-3 years. I've known this guy, and I came across him a couple times, him and his wife, and like they had picked up a new hobby during pandemic scenario, and they had been going out on hikes throughout the city, going up north, going through the woods, and they've been foraging for mushrooms and like getting into mycology. And
Mm.
like you could just see them talking about it, like beaming with happiness, like identifying different mushrooms,
Yeah.
harvesting different mushrooms, taking them home and cooking them with filet mignon and like different stuff, and just like, and like he's like he's like a big tough dude with like a beard and like deep voice, and like he kind of has like a certain energy if you just see him like on the surface, but he's actually just like super happy and excited to like be harvesting mushrooms. And then recently he came by. I hadn't seen him in a little while, and he came by, and I had just gotten to work, and he sort of like, he was checking out at the register because I work at a grocery store, but he had saw that I came in, and he ran out of line and came over to me, and he's like, "Oh, I got to run real quick, but take this." And he hands me a little paper bag, and it was just like mushrooms that he grew, that he cultivated, a certain
Oh, wow.
a certain type of mushroom, if you will. And he was like, "You thought you might be able to utilize, I thought you might like this." And I was just like, "Man, that is so nice of you." Like, that is really
The gift
cool.
economy.
Yeah, for sure. And
Yeah.
yeah, the mushroom thing was like at the end of our conversation last time, of just like going back to that whole like natural life and like the magic of existence and other life forms in our natural world. Like, mushrooms are amazing, and like maybe we need to keep focusing on this mushroom thing. Maybe that's the answer.
Maybe I have to incorporate mushrooms into some of our little rituals.
Definitely. I would. Yeah.
Actually, the interesting thing is, so I'm plotting out because I want to go to Bloomberg Philanthropies, which is on the Upper East Side off of Central Park. And we were trying to figure out like a place like to gather, like to be on the ground, not just on the city sidewalk per se. And so I was looking in Central Park of like what was in the like, if we walked into Central Park from that location, like a block or so from like what was there in the park. And it was the Alice in Wonderland statue with the mushrooms. Like they're all sitting on top of the mushrooms. Like that's the statue. And I was like, that's a perfect place. Like that's actually like a perfect place to have kind of a like a do something before then walk over there. But
Yeah.
I
It
was like,
sounds.
that's interesting because sometimes I do. I feel like I've fallen through the looking glass, this thing, and Allison is actually like little Alice, like, and I never really made that connection. But like, there's Alice at CERN, and Alice the United Way, and Alice this computer coding center system, and like, there's a whole lot of Alice going on. So
Yep. And like that's like, again, like the mythology meets pop culture interfacing with.
Disney.
Yeah, it's all so interesting, but I think that's a great idea. That sounds like the perfect spot to like charge up that natural real world energy, take the intention, and like bring that, like that art installation you were talking about with the hand and the smoke. It's like whatever you could channel out of the spot you were saying, I don't think the hand and the smoke would be any match for it, It's like
Yeah,
it's there
I know.
trying to
Well, that's
stop
what
us.
I think. Whatever this is, it's in another realm, and there's not really a guidebook on how to do it. So I think some of it is like learning to listen to your instinct, like keep your awareness open for other people, other things that happen to you, listen to your gut, and try to like weave something together, like, again, not in an appropriative way, but just in a way that seems to make sense. And I was talking to my friend who does the farming about the dandelions, and they're like, that is the perfect thing. Like, I mean, also probably mushrooms because they're also like communal, right? They're available, they're out in the open. Like no one lays claim to the dandelion per se. Like it's everybody's. And even for like really like botanically impoverished urban city dwellers, like the dandelion is still around. So
I love it. I think it's a beautiful thought. Well, I think,
I guess
I
that's
mean,
a couple hours.
yeah, we're good in the 2 hour mark. That's like our sweet spot. Um,
Yeah, I think my husband's probably waiting for me to come down to dinner.
that's fair. Yeah, I think I gotta go do some dishes to prepare for dinner, to be honest with you. But wow, Alice, what a pleasure. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I enjoy it. It's always nice to have like a good blockchain conversation
Yeah,
or
definitely.
like the little subset.
Without the conversation being blockchain yet.
Exactly, right. Well, who knows, right? Like maybe the AI has blockchained it somewhere and we're feeding it at the
in
same
the
time.
other
I mean,
in the other realm.
in the other realm, I don't know. It'll be held against us in the thought police by some future point, but
Yeah, I can't wait. No, no, we'll beat that. We don't need to
we
go there.
gotta erase that piece. Yeah.
That's right. I'll reach out to you via email. Maybe I could send you some things in like the physical realm one of these days. I have,
Okay.
but yeah, I would love to send you my copy of Childhood's End
Wow. Okay.
and some
I
other.
think the science fiction people, they knew stuff. They
They knew
definitely,
they knew
they knew.
something.
Yeah.
Arthur C. Clarke, especially him and Kubrick were channeling something. I don't know what, but
Mm.
Allison, thank you so much. What a pleasure. And I
All right.
look forward to
Good
the
night.
next conversation.
Yeah. Till next time.
Till next
See ya.
time.